You're listening to the CaribClimate podcast, produced by the Investment Plan for the Caribbean Regional Track of the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, funded by the Inter-American Development Bank through the Climate Investment Funds and implemented by the Project Management Unit of the University of the West Indies Mona Office for Research and Innovation. The climate is changing and the sea is changing with it. This affects fishing patterns, fish stock, and the safety of fisherfolk who travel further out in the sea to catch migratory fish, also moving further away with the changes of the ocean caused by climate change. The fisheries component of the Caribbean Regional PPCR project explored climate-related changes in the marine and coastal environment to improve regional fisheries management. This area of the project is led by the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, CRFM. In this episode of the CaribClimate podcast, we speak with Dr. Marion Headley, Program Manager, Fisheries Management and Development, and former Deputy Head of the CRFM, Dr. Suzanne Singh Renton. The fisheries sector is the lifeline for coastal communities across the region. How has climate change affected the marine and coastal resources in the Caribbean?
Some examples of how climate change has affected the marine and coastal resources. Systems in the Caribbean include rising mean sea levels at rates similar to the global average, with regional differences in interannual variability. So just meaning that some countries will have different levels of sea level rise throughout the year. Shifts in pattern of Atlantic tropical storms, warming of Caribbean sea surface temperatures by approximately 1.5 degrees Celsius over the last century, and also mass coral bleaching events, which are linked to extremely high sea surface temperatures, have been increasingly documented, as well as sargassum blooms, and which have become more common in the last decade, as well as increasing acidity in the Caribbean basin, again with seasonal and spatial variations.
What do these impacts mean for coastal communities in the Caribbean?
For coastal communities in the Caribbean, it means that you can have, for example, coral reef bleaching, which could affect your reef fisheries, which can affect your tourism product, which can affect the ability of the reef to protect the coast from storms. And everybody knows the impacts of the sargassum influxes. So you can't go out fishing, or the beach has a lot of sargassum on it. And sea level rise, things like loss of infrastructure, loss of access to jetties, things like that.
You know, you're talking about even the chemical composition of the seawater changing, and its physical characteristics as well. You know, the temperature of the water, because the quality of the seawater is changing, and this is having a dramatic impact on sea life. It is predicted that our fish are going to be going deeper and actually moving further north, so to the more northern latitudes. So we are expecting to see less sea life in our Caribbean areas. So and basically those are some of, you know, that's a big change for us.
Given these significant impacts on ocean and marine life, how did the marine resources subcomponent address climate challenges and risks related to the fisheries sector.
Okay, so the Caribbean coastal communities and the ecosystem services they provide, like food, livelihoods, protection from storms, are of course under threat from climate change. And this region is considered to be one of the most vulnerable regions in the world with regards to the impacts of climate change on coastal communities, especially low-lying areas for sea level rise. And this project has improved availability and use of information for climate smart planning and management in the fisheries and aquaculture sector in the Caribbean.
Prior to the PPCR, we didn't have, some specifics in terms of what to expect for our marine ecosystems. So the PPCR gave us a very good opportunity to strengthen our information base about how our marine ecosystems are expected to change and sea life within these ecosystems. And so one of the main activities was actually impact assessments. And so we did ecological impact assessments, economic impact assessments, and also studied the value chains in a couple of the pilot countries. Another key activity was actually the development of a fisheries early warning and emergency response system. The acronym is FEWA. And that has been very successful. I would say both activities were very successfully executed and gave us very strong products for moving forward.
The regional PPCR and CRFM ensured that climate responses in the fisheries sector centered small-scale fishers and communities. The project utilized technology to help reduce vulnerability of fisherfolk from natural disasters and other climate threats through the FEWA app.
Well, beginning with the FEWA app, the Fisheries Early Warning and Emergency Response System, this system there are two components to it. It's an ICT solution. So there's a web-based component, and that is managed by the agencies which administrate the system. And there is a mobile application component, and you download it on your phone. So the mobile application is downloaded by fishers on their phones, and the web-based component is installed on computers in the fisheries authorities and at the regional level by CRFM and also CDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency.
The development of the FEWA app also fostered improved disaster coordination across the region.
I'm very happy that once we had developed FEWA, that CRFM established a memorandum of understanding with CDEMA, and CDEMA agreed to serve as the global administrator for FEWA. So FEWA, we piloted it in 4 Eastern Caribbean countries, and we've had a very good response by the fishers, and also when the other countries, the membership of CRFM and CARICOM saw the value in FEWA, they are keen to come on board as well. So with CDEMA serving as the global administrator, this has 2 advantages. First of all, CDEMA deals with emergency management generally. So by CDEMA adopting FEWA, it means that the Fisheries Early Warning and Emergency Response ICT solution can be seamlessly integrated into the CDEMA system. And this is at the regional level. And we also arranged it for a national parallel. So at the national level, The countries, we drafted memoranda of understanding so that the various agencies working, say, to provide weather services, fisheries information, emergency management information, they have also to work together at the national level. And because of the SEDIMA involvement, we expect that there is going to be a national parallel. And in fact, since the end of the PPCR project, the marine subcomponent, St. Lucia has formally launched FEWA and established a national memorandum of understanding. So these arrangements are ongoing as we speak, and SEDIMA is working to, the FEWA is being updated and it is being integrated into the overall SEDIMA system.
100 fisherfolk were trained in the use of FEWA, with user manuals created and distributed. Fisherfolk can communicate more effectively with each other using FEWA, which serves as a vital and frequently used source of information to improve safety at sea.
FEWA has different segments. So there's, or modules. So there's one for local ecological knowledge where fishers can enter any local information they have about fishing grounds, etc. There's a messaging module. They can exchange messages with each other. There's a weather module, an alerts module, an emergency contacts module, one for emergency procedures, damage reporting, and missing persons.
The design and development of FEWA was an inclusive process that involved fisherfolk from the start.
We have been able to monitor the users, the number of users that are using the FEWA app during the pilots, and there was all the persons who were trained. They had an active working group. FEWA WhatsApp groups have been established. These remain active, and actually fishers exchange information about adverse weather and sea conditions. They exchange information when boats are lost at sea. So the FEWA WhatsApp groups were very active, and then there were working groups active when we were designing FEWA during the pilots. So the fishers they were trained in the usage and they began to use FEWA. At the moment, while SEDIMA is it's in the process of being transferred to SEDIMA, there has been a little disruption, not complete disruption, but FEWA is being updated at the moment. And but we have monitored the users, and so we know that the fishers have found it very useful, and they were very involved in the design of FEWA as well. So they had a say in what services they wanted, to be built into the FEWA ICT solution.
The project also generated a climate-smart fisheries database to expand regional knowledge of the fisheries ecosystem.
In terms of the information base, our impact assessments, this information, it was over 100 species. I think about 110 species were assessed, and we were able to estimate the shifts in the distributions of these species. So we now have information about what to expect in the near future as a result of climate change with regard to species that are the subject of many of our commercial fisheries. And this puts us in a position of being able to plan for these changes that are coming. And this information base is available. We have, I know that the PPCR project has these, the reports, the impact assessments, and also it is on the CRFM website. CRFM established a portal where all of this information and actually maps of, the species distributions that are expected in the future. You can access these via the CRFM portal.
Across the Caribbean, coastlines are covered in sargassum seaweed. The influx has been impacting local economies, especially where leisure and livelihood activities are concerned.
So climate change and the warming sea temperatures in the Caribbean has led to massive blooms in sargassum, which is a floating seaweed, and this has been washing up on beaches across the Caribbean, affecting tourism and fisheries landing sites. And these influxes cause millions of dollars in loss of tourism revenue and has also negatively impacted fisheries. And this initiative, while not directly addressing sargassum influxes, one of the outputs of this PPCR project was that the regional strategy and action plan for climate change adaptation and disaster risk management in fisheries and aquaculture was updated under this project. And it has, as one of its strategic elements, adaptation and implementation of measures to address sargassum.
Okay, on sargassum, this phenomenon has been with us since 2011. In 2011, it was really an amazing and frightening sight, actually, because there were large floating mats of sargassum. It's a floating species of seaweed. And since, over the years, there have been a number of studies trying to work it out. They believe the source is the source that is impacting, at least in the Eastern Caribbean, from the south. So off the northeast coast of South America, maybe with all the change in environmental conditions in the ocean, this has created conditions for growth of the sargassum. And so we have seen sargassum mats practically, every year since 2011. We are faced with this problem. And we now have, of course, there are services that can predict, the sargassum, how much sargassum, to expect. There are months when it's particularly bad and so forth. It's been a real challenge too, because it has affected fishing operations. Shrimp trawlers, they cannot operate when the sargassum, really bad days of sargassum. It impacts on the deployment of the gear. The gear cannot function. It becomes, for outboard engines and fishing gear, nets, they become entangled with sargassum, and it really messes up the fishing operations. In addition to that, it has also affected availability and accessibility of types of species that are harvested by our fishermen. It has affected the flying fish fishery. It has affected the dolphin fish fishery. With the sargassum mats, we also see new species. And, so species that are associated with the sargassum, which we would not normally see in our waters, we're seeing them. So we're seeing species in, odd places to what we were used to. How our work has included that is that in terms of it has really been able to predict that because of the changes in conditions, we can expect changes in the level of catches and shifts in species distributions. So to the extent possible, the information on sargassum and its impacts has been incorporated into the assessments. But sargassum specifically, was not, we didn't have estimates, for example, of amount of sargassum built into the assessments. But the assessments would have considered fundamental changes in the ocean conditions. And sargassum is just one sort of symptom of that change. So there could be other symptoms, and all of these are affecting the species going to affect the species in a certain way, as I explained earlier, that they're likely to move further north and into deeper water as well.
What have been some of the major successes of the marine resources component?
So this project has provided a foundation of data. It also developed monitoring frameworks, adaptation strategies, policy recommendations, and various communication tools to support a regional climate change response. And this is important because despite the growing understanding of the potential impacts of climate change, the progress towards fishery sector adaptation in the Caribbean region to date has been constrained by a lack of region-specific data and practical guidance, and that is the gap that this project filled.
The improved information base will help to develop strategies to enhance fisheries management, as well as opportunities for the region to access more resources to scale the fishing industry.
For example, a lot of the ecological modeling that looked at various scenarios of climate change and movement of fish away, loss of revenue, loss of livelihoods, that can be used in developing risk and mitigation strategies at the national level for the countries to address these things. It can also be used when you're doing proposals for grant funding. For example, you have the hard data to reference. And the updated regional strategy is also very useful for day-to-day actions and activities that you can undertake at the national level. And then the FURA app is, again, useful in like local ecological knowledge. It's a way for fishers to document things that they will observe, for example, at sea.
The key findings from the ecological and socioeconomic impact assessments have resulted in a wealth of data. But what areas of fisheries management will the data inform?
Okay, so some of the findings of the ecological assessment was that there was a changing species distribution and abundance that will be projected over time with increased with climate change. So these things included drops in catches or reduced catches, reduced income, and for species, pelagics and demersals. Like pelagics, for example, would be things like dolphin fish, and demersals would be like reef species. And these were found to be some of the most vulnerable species that will be affected by climate change. Also, welfare of course, fishers that depend on these species. And again, this will also affect food security.
The data from the impact assessments now serve as a repository for the region. Fisheries stakeholders can access the data for use in research, policy, and decision-making. However, the findings indicate an urgent need to address malpractices that could harm the future of the Caribbean fisheries sector.
Interestingly, what came out of the assessments was that it's very important that we address overfishing where it's happening and illegal fishing where it's happening. And this is because overfishing and illegal fishing are creating unnecessary pressures. So we do not have control over nature. There are some changes that are coming with climate change that are inevitable, and we have to plan for those. But there are poor practices that we are applying right now, and we need to address those because those are under our control. And some of those poor practices are overfishing and illegal fishing, and also pollution. So when we did the impact assessments, there are these very clear bottom line messages that we, it has given us that we can do, and we can do something. This is what we can do. We can ensure sustainable management of fisheries. We can combat illegal fishing and try to eliminate it. And we also have to not overfish. So if you are managing sustainably, you will avoid overfishing. Pollution is much more difficult because it's not just the fishing sector is responsible for polluting our oceans. So that has a wider responsibility that the countries need to address. But, these are very clear bottom line messages that if we address these, we will, markedly diminish the impacts of climate change.
Harnessing technology to develop an early warning and emergency response system was a major accomplishment for the project. The development of FEWER not only benefited the fishing community, regional institutions worked together to shape the technology, policy, and disaster risk management dimensions of the project. A classic example of mainstreaming climate action.
As I did mention, in my view, the FEWER, the Fisheries Early Warning and Emergency Response System, the ICT solution, this has been a success. It is being adopted by SEDIMA. The original software developer was from UWI, and UWI, both the St. Augustine and the Mona campuses, they remain committed. It was the St. Augustine campus, they were the software developers, of course. The Mona campus managed the PPCR, and both campuses, the particular experts have remained committed to this process, continue to work with SEDIMA, as also the CRFM under its Memorandum of Understanding. Countries, I know from the CRFM standpoint, many of the other CRFM countries want to come on board with FEWER. And St. Lucia is being our champion. St. Lucia was a pilot country, and so is actually a step ahead. It has the National Memorandum of Understanding established as well. So it formally launched FEWER, that is St. Lucia. And this is very important too for saving lives at sea because, as the term implies, early warning and emergency response, FEWER allows for provision of weather services, so you can find out what the weather is going to be, what the sea conditions are going to be before you go out to fish. There is also a provision for emergency response. You can report damages, you can report missing persons. So very valuable ICT solution has been developed there.
The improved information base for planning affords the Caribbean more proactive responses to challenges at sea.
So we don't have any excuses now. We know what is coming. We have a very good idea about how the oceans are going to change, how species are going to react. The fishermen are already complaining that they have to go further offshore to find fish, that there is less fish in the sea, that there are changes associated with the sargassum when it comes in. So they're actually validating what these impact assessments have provided. So this information base is a major strength at this time. And we have estimates of economic losses, and we also have analyses of the value chains and recommendations for how the value chain should be developed, because we will have less fish and we have to aim for zero wastage. So we actually have to make better use of whatever fish is available to us. And in all of that, we had also developed a strategy and action plan for addressing climate change for the fishery sector. And that strategy and action plan has been tailored also alongside the CARICOM framework for dealing with climate change. So there are many different components to this strategy and action plan. And this has incorporated, this strategy and action plan, I should say, has incorporated the results of the impact assessments that we did. So we feel very happy for the opportunity of the PPCR project, and we feel very happy about the products that we were able to generate, and we're very pleased that these products are being used. People are quoting them and using them already, and they are guiding the strategy and action plan that we have for climate change, and also the overall CRFM strategy and action plan, which is they now have a new strategy and action plan, which you may know about, which was recently approved by the CRFM Ministerial Council. So going forward, I think that we're in a strong position, but we now have to we have good products that we have to, in going forward, we have to make full use of.
With the advances made in improving capacity and resources for the sector, Dr. Singh Renton encourages greater focus on the marine and ocean sector.
I think that we have very good information available, and there are messages there for all stakeholders in the industry, and there are messages there even for other industries that we may have to network with. For example, the tourism industry, the construction industry. There are messages there as we move towards more holistic management of our systems. And remember that, what is happening on the decisions about, development in agriculture, in construction, in tourism, these are going to impact the health of the oceans. So I think our products, everyone needs to pay attention to. They're going to be very useful to inform overall national development planning and decision making.
The CaribClimate podcast is produced by the Investment Plan for the Caribbean Regional Track of the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, funded by the Inter-American Development Bank through the Climate Investment Funds and implemented by the Project Management Unit of the University of the West Indies Mona Office for Research and Innovation. The CaribClimate podcast, using data to make climate resilience greater.